The bread was already in the oven. That is the first thing to understand about the morning of August 24th, in the year 79 AD. The bread was already in the oven. The fishmonger had already set up his stall near the Porta Marina. The fuller's workshop on the Via dell'Abbondanza was already processing its first batch of cloth. The schoolmaster had already gathered his students in the portico near the Forum, and their voices, the repetitive, slightly bored chant of children reciting Latin declensions, were already audible to anyone passing within earshot. The city was already in motion. It was already, by any reasonable measure, an ordinary Tuesday. The mountain behind the city had been making noise for several days. It had been making noise for longer than that, in a subtler way, small tremors, the occasional deep vibration in the ground that made the water in the cisterns tremble, the smell of sulfur that came sometimes on the wind from the direction of the summit. These things had been noticed. They had been discussed, in the specific way that people discuss things that are concerning but not immediately actionable, which is briefly, with some collective shrugging, and then mostly put aside in favor of the business of the day. The mountain had made noise before. The mountain was always making some kind of noise. Vesuvius, as later generations would name it, had not erupted in living memory. It had not erupted in recorded history. The people of the cities in its shadow had no conceptual framework for what an eruption was, because an eruption had never happened in their world, and the human mind does not prepare for events that have no precedent in its experience. The mountain was a feature of the landscape, the large thing to the north that you saw every day and that was simply there, as permanent and as unremarkable as the sea to the south. It was background. This is the story of the people who lived in its foreground. Welcome to Dull Tales. I'm glad you're here tonight, wherever you are, however you found your way to a history channel at this particular hour. This is what we do. We slow the past all the way down and follow ordinary people through extraordinary moments, and we find what was real and human and sensory in the middle of it all. No dramatic music, no countdown clocks, no dramatic recreations that make everything feel like a disaster movie. Just the story, told slowly, the way it deserves. Tonight we're going to Pompeii. Not to the catastrophe is in every textbook, and I am not going to compete with a textbook. We're going to the days before it, the weeks. The ordinary Tuesday morning in August when the bread was in the oven and the schoolchildren were reciting their declensions, and a woman named Lucia was arguing with a fruit seller about the price of figs and nobody was thinking about the mountain. Because the story of Pompeii is not the story of the eruption. The story of Pompeii is the story of everything that existed before the eruption, the world so fully and so specifically itself that it left traces in the ash that archaeologists have been reading for 3 centuries with a combination of precision and something like love. Let's go there. Get comfortable. The lights can be low. This one goes slowly because Pompeii deserves slowness and because slowly is the only way to see it. And if you want to tell me where you're listening from tonight, whether you've ever been to the site, whether you've walked the streets of Pompeii in the present-day version, whether you've stood in the plaster casts of the people who did not get out, leave it in the comments. I want to know. Now Tuesday morning, August 24th, the year 79 AD. Let me take you to a bakery. The bakery is on the Via di Nola, one of the main streets running east-west through the city. Its formal name, to the extent that a bakery in a Roman city has a formal name, is determined by who owns it, and the owner is a man named Marcus Vesilius Vericundus, who is 41 years old and who has been running this bakery for 11 years and who, on the morning of August 24th, is doing exactly what he does every morning of his life, which is supervising the production of the bread that the city needs. The bakery is large by the standards of the district, 4 stone mills for grinding grain, each one driven by a donkey walking in circles, producing the continuous sound of millstone on millstone that is the bakery's ambient music. A large oven, dome-shaped, built of volcanic stone because the best ovens in this region are built of volcanic stone, which holds heat with a completeness that other materials cannot match. The irony of this, that the stone from the same geological system that will kill the city in a few hours is the stone that bakes its bread this morning, is not available to Marcus or to anyone else in the city, because irony requires the retrospective view, and from inside the morning there is no retrospective. There is only the morning. Marcus checks the bread. He does this with the specific expertise of someone who has been doing it for 11 years. The slight flecks of the loaf, the sound when tapped, the color of the crust, the smell that tells him before any of these visual and tactile checks whether the temperature and the timing have been right. He is satisfied. The bread is good. It is always good when Verecundus is paying attention, which is most of the time, because the bread is the business, and the business is the life, and Marcus Vesilius Verecundus is not the kind of man who allows himself the luxury of not paying attention. He loads the first batch into the carrying baskets. His assistant, a young man named Tyro, 17, the son of a freedman in the neighborhood, who has been working here for 2 years and who is beginning to develop the specific bread knowledge that only time in a bakery produces, takes the baskets and begins the morning rounds. The morning delivery is one of the things that makes this particular bakery successful in a city full of bakeries. The bread comes to you, if you are a regular customer, still warm from the oven, still carrying the smell that is one of the best smells that the human nose has access to. The specific warm grain and scorched crust smell of fresh bread that operates on something below the level of preference and goes straight to the body's most ancient register of safety and comfort. Tyro walks the Via di Nola with his basket. He has made this walk so many times that his feet know it without his attention, and his attention is free to be elsewhere, which this morning means it is on the mountain. He has been thinking about the mountain for several days, not with specific alarm. He is 17, and the concept of specific geological alarm is not available to him, but with a vague attention that the mountain has been earning through its recent behavior. The tremors, the sound, which is not exactly a sound but more of a feeling, a vibration in the bones that arrives sometimes in the night. The spring near his family's house that has been running unusually warm for a week. He mentioned this to his father. His father said, "The mountain makes noises. It has always made noises." Tyro accepted this, as you accept the explanations of people who have been alive longer than you and who seem not to be alarmed, which is usually sufficient evidence that the thing requiring explanation is not, in fact, alarming. He walks the Via di Nola with his bread basket. Above the rooftops to the north, the mountain is visible as it is always visible, the broad dark shape against the morning sky. This morning there is a cloud of some kind above the summit, not a cloud exactly, more of a disturbance, a darkening at the top of the mountain that Tyro has not seen before, but that is not large enough, this early in the morning, to seem like anything more than unusual weather. He delivers the bread. He comes back to the bakery for the second load. The bread is in the oven. Let me step away from Marcus and Tyro now and take you to a house on the Via della Fortuna, which is one of the more affluent streets in Pompeii's central district, where the houses are larger and the walls are painted with more ambition, and the morning starts later than in the Via di Nola. The house belongs to a woman named Livia. Livia is 38 years old, the widow of a merchant who died 4 years ago, leaving her the house, a wine shop on the Via della Bendanza, and a complicated web of debts and credits that she has been managing ever since with the patient competence of someone who had no choice but to become competent. She has 2 children, a son of 14 and a daughter of 11, and a household that runs on the labor of 4 slaves and 1 freed woman named Paula, who has been with her for 15 years and who is, in the specific way of the people who keep our lives running, the person without whom none of it would work. Livia is awake. She is, in fact, almost always awake before anyone else in the household, in the specific way of women who are responsible for everything. The responsibility producing the early waking producing the quiet morning hours in which the household can be assessed before anyone requires anything. She is in the garden. The garden of Livia's house is the heart of the building, a rectangular space open to the sky, surrounded by a colonnade, planted with roses and laurel and a fig tree that produces fruit in August that Livia regards as one of the reliable pleasures of the year. The garden this morning is in the specific quality of an August garden in Campania at sunrise. The light just coming over the top of the colonnade, the air still cool but already carrying the promise of the day's heat, the roses catching the morning light in the way that roses do, which is comprehensively. She sits on the stone bench, beside the fig tree. She is thinking about the wine shop. The wine shop on the Via della Bendanza has been doing well this summer. The tourist traffic has been high, Pompeii being a city that benefits significantly from the traffic of wealthy Romans who come down from the capital to spend summer in the Bay region, which is the fashionable place to be in summer if you are the kind of person who has the option of being fashionable. These summer visitors drink wine at a rate that the locals find impressive, and that Paula, who runs the actual shop, finds merely regular. Livia is thinking about the inventory. She is also thinking about her son. Her son Marcus, named for his father, which Livia finds occasionally confusing and occasionally touching, is 14, and is at the age that 14-year-old boys in Roman society are at, which is the age of transition, the age when the formal processes of education and preparation for adult life are accelerating, when the question of what kind of man he will be is beginning to be answered by the specific choices and opportunities of the next few years. She is thinking about his education, about the teacher she has been paying, a Greek freedman named Demetrios, competent and expensive, and whether the money is being spent on the right things, whether Demetrios' emphasis on rhetoric is the emphasis her son needs, whether she should be pressing for more time on the practical subjects, the accounting and the law that will actually be useful in the management of the business she intends to leave him. These are Tuesday morning thoughts. Ordinary, practical, forward-looking. The mountain behind the northern wall of the city is visible above the roofline if she stands and looks in the right direction, which she does not do this morning, because the morning is for thinking, and the mountain is simply the mountain, and the specific quality of the August morning light on the roses is requiring her attention and getting it. She hears Paula in the kitchen. She hears her daughter's voice, a complaint from the sleeping room directed at her brother who has apparently done something worth complaining about before breakfast, which is not unusual. She stays in the garden for another few minutes. The morning is good. Let me take you now to the Forum. The Forum of Pompeii on this Tuesday morning is doing what the Forum does on Tuesday mornings, which is everything simultaneously. The Forum is the center of the city's commercial and political and religious life, a long rectangular open space surrounded by temples, by the basilica where the law courts operate, by the offices of the city's elected officials, by shops and porticos and the covered market building, whose morning-produced sales have already attracted a crowd of shoppers moving through the stalls. A man named Gaius is in the Forum. He is 56 years old and he is a duumvir, one of the two annually elected magistrates who serve as Pompeii's chief officials, responsible for the administration of justice and the management of the city's finances. He is, by the standards of Pompeian society, a significant person, elected by the property-owning citizens of the city to a position of genuine power and genuine responsibility, a man whose decisions affect the lives of the approximately 20,000 people who live within Pompeii's walls. He is having a difficult morning. The difficulty is specific and administrative. There is a dispute between two property owners about the boundary between their properties, a dispute that has been in the courts for 3 years and that has now, through the specific mechanism by which legal disputes become political problems, landed on Gaius's desk in the form of competing petitions from two men who both have political connections and both are threatening to make those connections uncomfortable if the ruling goes against them. Gaius has been a magistrate for 6 years. He has managed more difficult disputes than this one. What he finds difficult about this particular morning is not the dispute itself, but the fact that he had a very bad night. The tremors were worse than usual, 2 or 3 significant ones, enough to wake him and keep him awake. And the day is presenting itself with the specific unpleasantness of a complicated day that has to be managed on insufficient sleep. He walks through the forum. He stops at the Temple of Jupiter, which occupies the north end of the forum and whose view, from its high steps, takes in the entire length of the rectangular space and beyond it to the rooftops, and beyond the rooftops to the mountain. He looks at the mountain. Something about it this morning is different. He cannot say exactly what. He has been looking at this mountain from these steps on and off for 30 years, and the thing that is different this morning is not visible exactly. It is more of a quality, a something about the light on the upper slopes. Darkness at the summit that is not quite weather. He looks at it for a moment. Then he turns back to the forum. He has a full morning of hearings. The property dispute is first. A man named Quintus is waiting for him at the basilica door. Gaius walks toward him. The forum continues its mourning. Now let me give you the fuller picture of what Pompeii was on this particular morning. Not just the individual scenes, but the texture of the whole. The city as a single living organism that has been developing for centuries, and that is, on August 24th, 79 AD, at something close to its peak of vitality. Pompeii has been inhabited since approximately the 8th century BC, which means it is almost 800 years old on this particular morning. It has been a Samnite town and an Etruscan satellite and a Roman ally, and finally, after the social war of the early 1st century BC, a Roman colony with the full political and legal status that this confers. The city's architecture reflects this history in layers. The oldest buildings at the bottom of the stratigraphic record, the Roman period most visible in the buildings that fill the streets on this Tuesday morning. The population on this morning is approximately 20,000 people. 20,000 people in a walled city of approximately 66 hectares, which is dense, urban, the kind of density that produces the specific qualities of urban life that Pompeii demonstrates in remarkable archaeological abundance. The shops, the restaurants, the public baths, the brothels, the temples, the political campaign notices painted on walls, the graffiti, the fountains, the sewers, the water system. The water system. Pompeii's water system is one of the more impressive pieces of municipal engineering that survives from the Roman world, and it is running at full capacity on this Tuesday morning, which means that the approximately 120 public fountains scattered through the city street grid are all flowing, that the private connections to the wealthier houses are supplied, that the baths have their hot and cold pools filled to the correct levels, and that the small businesses that require water, the fulleries, the tanneries, the dyeworks have what they need. The system runs on pressure from a water tower near the port of Vesuvio, the northern gate, the gate that faces the mountain, and the water comes from the springs in the hills and from the great aqueduct that supplies the entire Campanian plain, the Aqua Augusta, whose infrastructure is a marvel that the people of Pompeii use without particular appreciation, in the way that people use infrastructure they have always had. In 3 hours, the water will stop. The earthquake that precedes the eruption will rupture the pipe from the water tower and the fountains will go dry, and the cisterns will be the only water remaining, and the specific municipal failure of the water supply will be one of the first signs, for many Pompeians, that this day is different from the days before it. But that is in 3 hours. Right now the water runs. The fountains flow. A woman named Lucia is at the fountain on the Via della Bendanza, filling her water vessel and arguing with the fruit seller, whose stall is set up across the street. The argument is about figs. The argument is not really about figs. It is about a debt and a promise and a relationship between two people who have been neighbors for 15 years, and whose relationship contains enough history that the figs are simply the current form of a conversation that runs continuously under the surface of their daily interactions. Lucia is 33 years old. She is a freedwoman, freed from slavery 11 years ago when the household she served was dissolved following the death of its owner, and she lives in 2 rooms above a shop on the Via della Bendanza with her partner, a man named Felix who works as a porter at the harbor, and her elderly mother, who arrived 3 years ago from a village to the north of the city, and who has not yet decided whether she approves of Felix. Lucia is arguing about figs because she is good at arguing. Not in the aggressive way. She has the specific competence of a woman who knows the value of everything she buys and knows what fair is, and has no particular interest in paying more than fair. The fruit seller, whose name is Gaius, and who has known Lucia for all 15 years that she has lived on this street, argues back with the equally specific competence of someone who knows exactly where the negotiation will land, and is simply performing the required steps on the way there. They argue. They reach an agreement. Lucia puts the figs in her basket. She picks up her water vessel. She looks up the street, toward the north, in the automatic way that people in this city look north sometimes because the mountain is there. The mountain is there. Something about it this morning, she has been thin. King about this, or half thinking about it for a few days now, is different. The tremors, the smell, and now there is something above the summit, a darkening, a cloud that is not a cloud, higher than clouds usually are. She watches it for a moment. Gaius, packing up his fig supply, notices her watching. He says, "The mountain has been like that since yesterday." She says, "Has it always done that?" He says, "I don't know, maybe." He doesn't know. She doesn't know. Nobody in the city knows, because knowledge of volcanic activity has not been accumulated in the 2 millennia since the last eruption, because 2 millennia is long enough to forget what a volcano does, because the specific pattern of forgetting that makes catastrophe possible is built into the human relationship with geological time. The mountain has always been there, and has never done anything, and therefore will always be there, and will never do anything. She picks up her basket. She goes home. She is thinking about what to cook for lunch, because Felix will be home at midday, and her mother has expressed opinions about what she considers acceptable midday meals, and navigating these opinions while also feeding 2 adults and an opinionated elderly woman on a Tuesday in August requires a specific kind of planning. The mountain is behind her as she walks home. The something above the summit grows slightly larger. The morning continues. Let me take you to the baths. The Stabian baths are the oldest and largest of Pompeii's public bath complexes, a structure that has been in continuous operation for almost 300 years, expanded and modified and improved over those centuries, until it is, on this Tuesday morning, a large and well-organized establishment that serves hundreds of Pompeians daily. The baths open in the morning and stay open until the evening. The morning patrons are typically the working population, the people who come before their workday begins, or in the early morning hours when the baths are less crowded. A man named Decimus is in the cold pool. He is 43 years old, a freedman like Lucia, and he works as a financial manager for a trading company that operates from the Via Marina near the harbor. He is a morning bather, has been for 20 years, the routine so deeply embedded in his daily life that skipping it would feel like skipping something structural, like skipping the walls of the house. He sits in the cold pool with the specific quality of enjoyment that cold water produces after the sequence of hot rooms, the relief of the cold after the heat, the body recalibrating, the specific alertness that the cold water imposes. He is thinking about a contract. He is always thinking about a contract of some kind. It is the texture of his professional life, the numbers and the agreements and the relationships that connect them, the chain of obligation and payment and delivery that the trading company's operations consist of. He thinks about contracts with the same automatic background attention that other people think about their children or their social obligations, the business running through the back of his mind, while the front of his mind does other things. This morning, the front of his mind is on the baths. He looks at the ceiling of the cold room, vaulted stone, very old, the paint above the water line showing the specific quality of a fresco that has been absorbing bath moisture for centuries, the colors still vivid in places and faded in others, a Neptune with his trident visible above the doorway arch. He looks at Neptune. He thinks, "Good morning." This is not sincere devotion. It is the specific casual piety of someone who acknowledges the divine in passing, in the way that a person might say good morning to a neighbor they are passing without stopping, the acknowledgement present and genuine, and also completely insufficient for anything a theologian would recognize as religious engagement. Neptune looks back from the fresco. Decimus gets out of the cold pool. He dries off. He dresses. He goes through the changing room and out through the portico and into the street. It is approximately 9 in the morning. The mountain is visible from the street in the specific way that it is visible from many streets in Pompeii, through gaps between buildings, above roof lines, a constant geographic reference that the city uses to orient itself without ever thinking about what the reference means. Decimus looks at it for a second as he crosses the street. There is a cloud above it that was not there yesterday. He registers this with the vague attention that unusual weather receives a note, a slight curiosity, nothing more. He goes to work. The morning is progressing. Now let me take you to a house on the edge of the city, near the Porta Ercolano, the western gate that opens onto the road to Herculaneum. This house is one of the larger private residences in Pompeii, the kind of house that has a proper garden with a fish pond and a triclinium large enough to host 20 guests for dinner without anyone feeling cramped. The man who owns it is named Titus, and he is 51 years old, a retired military officer who came to Pompeii 20 years ago from Rome and who found, in the prosperous, pleasant, slightly provincial world of Campanian civic life, exactly the retirement he had imagined during the years of service. He is in the garden. He is reading. He is reading a letter from his son in Rome, which arrived yesterday and which he has read 3 times, and is reading again this morning with the patient attention of a father trying to extract from a letter written by a 23-year-old son the actual information content behind the young man's carefully managed presentation of everything being fine. The son is not fine. Or rather, the son is not in any specific difficulty, but the letter has the quality of a letter written by someone who is performing fine rather than experiencing it. And Titus, who has known this particular person for 23 years, and who has been receiving his letters for the past 4 years since he moved to Rome, can read the performance and the reality beneath it simultaneously. He thinks about writing back. He composes the reply in his head, as he always composes his first draft mentally, testing the sentences before committing them to the wax tablet. He is a careful writer, careful in the way of military men whose professional training included the discipline of clear communication, and the care produces letters that his son has told him, in a moment of unusual candor, are the clearest he receives from anyone. He puts the letter down. He looks at the garden. The fish pond is still. The fish, several large carp and a number of smaller fish whose names he has not bothered to learn, are moving with the slow, purposeful quality of fish in the early morning, which is unhurried and complete and not particularly interesting unless you are the kind of person who finds fish interesting, which Titus is, mildly, in the specific way of retired people who have developed the capacity to find moderate interest in modest things. He looks up. Above the garden's northern wall, above the rooflines beyond it, the mountain is visible in the way that it is always visible from this part of the city, close, large, the upper slopes detailed enough to show the individual trees. Something above the summit. He has been a soldier. He has learned, over years of professional attention to the environment, to distinguish between the weather that is background and the weather that is signal. The thing above the summit this morning is not background. It has a quality that is different from cloud, a verticality, a deliberateness, a darkness that is darker than cloud should be. He watches it for a moment longer than he would watch ordinary cloud. Then he picks up the letter from his son. He goes back to composing his reply. A man named Aurelius is in the city's amphitheater. The amphitheater is at the eastern end of the city, the largest structure in Pompeii and one of the oldest amphitheaters in the Roman world. It predates the Colosseum by more than 100 years, a fact that the people of Pompeii are aware of with a civic pride that they deploy occasionally in the presence of Romans from the capital, who receive it with the gracious patience of people who are used to the provinces having things to be proud of. On this Tuesday morning there are no games. The amphitheater is empty in the way that large stone structures are empty on mornings when nothing is scheduled. The specific quality of a large space designed for crowd occupation that is instead occupied by air and light and the occasional bird. Aurelius is here because he is a maintenance worker. He is 34 years old and he has worked in and around the amphitheater for 6 years, doing the specific maintenance that a structure this size requires, the repair of seating, the management of the awning system, the upkeep of the service passages that run beneath the spectator banks. He knows the building with the specific intimacy of someone who has been inside its walls and below its floors more times than he can count. He is here this morning to repair a section of stone seating in the upper bank that cracked during one of last week's tremors. He has been repairing tremor damage for a week. This is slightly unusual. The tremors come and go, have always come and gone, this being a seismically active region, but last week's sequence was more sustained than usual, more frequent, and the damage they produced was more visible. He repaired a section of the Forum colonnade. He repaired a wall at the Temple of Isis. He is now repairing the seating bank, and the damage is more significant than he expected, the crack running further up the stone tier than the initial assessment suggested. He looks at crack. He looks at it with the professional attention of someone who knows stone and knows what stone does when it fails and knows the difference between a crack that will extend and a crack that has stabilized. This crack has the quality of something that has not yet stabilized. It has the fresh look of recent movement. He runs his hand along it. He thinks this needs more than a patch. He thinks I should report this. He looks up from the crack, instinctively, as people look up from things that concern them, and he can see over the top of the amphitheater's outer wall to the mountain beyond the eastern edge of the city. The thing above the summit is now clearly visible. It is larger than it was an hour ago. It is moving upward. Aurelius looks at it with the specific quality of attention of a man whose professional relationship with structural integrity has made him attentive to the signs that things are about to fail, and the thing above the mountain has the quality of something that is not weather. He stands in the empty amphitheater and looks at the mountain. He will, in the next 2 hours, make a decision that the historical record does not capture, but that the logic of the day suggests. He will leave. The evidence is in the absence of his body from the site, in the fact that Pompeii's dead, when the archaeologists count them, do not represent the full population of 20,000, perhaps 2,000 bodies found, meaning that roughly 18,000 people either evacuated before the pyroclastic surges or survived, and Aurelius, who was paying attention to the signs, who was in a position to see the thing above the mountain before most people could, is likely among the 18,000. He leaves the amphitheater. He walks quickly through the eastern district of the city. But I am getting ahead of the morning. Let me go back. Let me give you more of the morning before the morning ends. Let me take you to a school. The school is not a building in the way that a modern school is a building. It is a space, a covered portico near the forum, where a teacher named Demetrios conducts his morning lessons for the 12 boys and 2 girls whose families have contracted with him for their education. Demetrios is Greek by birth, freed from a household in Naples a decade ago, and his educational services are in demand among the middling families of Pompeii who understand that a good Greek-educated teacher is an investment in the child's future that will pay returns in the form of a more effective adult. He is 48 years old, and he has been teaching for 20 years. His morning class has been going since the 2nd hour of the day, roughly an hour after sunrise, and will continue until the 5th hour, when the midday heat makes further intellectual effort inadvisable. The curriculum this morning is Latin rhetoric, which Demetrios approaches with the specific methodology that his own teacher taught him. Begin with the theory, move to the example, end with the performance. The students read the passage, they analyze the passage, they attempt their own versions. The students are of varying abilities and varying enthusiasm. The most able student this morning is a girl named Claudia, who is 11 years old and who has the specific quality of intelligence that makes a teacher's job both easier and harder. Easier because she grasps things quickly, harder because grasping things quickly means she has processed the lesson and has nothing to do while the slower students are still working, and the nothing to do produces a restlessness that she manages with varying degrees of success. She is currently writing her rhetoric exercise with one hand and watching the mountain with the other half of her attention. She has been watching the mountain all morning. She has the child's uncomplicated relationship with the unusual. She noticed the thing above the mountain when she arrived this morning. She has been monitoring it with the steady interest of someone who is watching something develop, and what she has noticed in the 2 hours since arrival is that the thing is bigger. Not slightly bigger, measurably bigger, in the specific way that a child who has been tracking something can measure growth without being able to quantify it. She says to the boy beside her, whose name is Aulus and who is 12 and less observant than Claudia by a margin that Demetrios has noticed, "The mountain is different today." Aulus looks at the mountain. He looks at it for approximately 1 second. He says it has a cloud on it. She says it's not a cloud. He says, "What is it then?" She has no answer for this. She goes back to her rhetoric exercise. Demetrios, at the front of the portico, is reading a student's work and making corrections with the practiced hand of someone who has seen every possible mistake in Latin grammar and can identify them in 2 seconds and correct them in 4. He looks up occasionally, as teachers do, to assess the room's engagement level. He looks at the mountain. He is from Naples, originally. He has grown up with Vesuvius as part of the landscape, and the Neapolitan relationship with the mountain is somewhat different from the Pompeian one. Naples is slightly further from the mountain, which produces a slightly different quality of familiarity. The mountain slightly less immediate, slightly more background. But Demetrios is educated. He has read Strabo, who described the volcanic geology of the region in terms that Demetrios can access. He knows that the mountain is volcanic in a way that most of his neighbors in Pompeii do not know, in the sense of knowing it academically, having read it in a text. Academic knowledge of a danger is not the same as felt knowledge. He knows the mountain is volcanic. He has never seen it be volcanic. The knowledge is a fact without weight. But this morning, the thing above the mountain is giving the knowledge weight. He watches it for longer than he has watched anything outside his classroom in years. Then he looks back at the students. He continues the lesson. Let me tell you about the graffiti. The walls of Pompeii are, among other things, one of the most extraordinary archives of ordinary human communication that has ever been preserved. Because the volcanic ash that destroyed the city also preserved it, sealed the streets and the buildings at a specific moment, like a pressed flower, capturing not just the architecture but the content of the walls at the moment of preservation. The graffiti of Pompeii has survived with a completeness that makes it unique in the ancient world. There are approximately 11,000 known graffiti in Pompeii. 11,000 pieces of writing on walls, spanning approximately 200 years, covering every register of human communication from the practical to the obscene, to the political, to the poetic, to the simply human. They are the equivalent of reading the social media of a Roman city. The same impulsivity, the same range of intelligence and vulgarity, the same evidence of people needing to leave a mark. On the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, these walls are as they are, layered with the accumulated communication of 2 centuries. And among the most recent additions is a piece of work that has been there for perhaps a week. It is on the wall of the basilica, near the forum entrance. It reads in painted red letters, Gaius Lucia. This Gaius is not the magistrate. This is another Gaius, a common name, as was Lucia, and who Gaius is and who Lucia is, and what the love means and whether it is requited or aspirational or recently concluded or still ongoing, are questions that the graffiti does not answer, and that the morning does not know will remain unanswered forever. Because by tomorrow the wall will be buried under 4 meters of pumice and ash, and the graffiti will not be read again for 17 centuries, when it will be excavated and noted, and added to the catalogue of the 11,000, and the specific quality of the love that Gaius felt for Lucia on the wall of the Pompeii Basilica will be accessible to any person who cares to look it up, which is a strange form of immortality that Gaius certainly did not intend when he painted the letters. But that is tomorrow. This morning the letters are fresh. Gaius, whoever he is, passes the wall on his way to the forum and feels the specific combination of pride and embarrassment that the public declaration of love produces in the person who made it in a moment of intensity, and who, in the daylight of the following week, is slightly uncertain about the decision. He walks past quickly. He goes about his Tuesday. Let me take you to the harbor. Pompeii is not a coastal city. It sits approximately 2 kilometers from the sea, connected to the coast by the Sarno River, which was in the 1st century AD a navigable waterway that allowed cargo vessels to move between the harbor at the river's mouth and the city's warehouses. The harbor is, on this Tuesday morning, busy with the specific business of a trading port. The unloading of cargo ships from across the Mediterranean, the loading of the amphorae of wine and fish sauce, and grain that Pompeii and its region produce for export, the movement of people and goods in the complex choreography of a working port. Felix, Lucia's partner, the porter she is cooking lunch for, is at the harbor. He is 40 years old, powerfully built, the kind of man whose body is shaped by decades of physical labor in the specific way that sustained heavy lifting shapes a body. The shoulder and back development, the particular way of moving, the economy of motion that comes from knowing exactly how to use your body without wasting effort. He has been a porter since he was 15. He does not find this work dignified in the way that his society would define dignity. Porterage is the lowest end of the harbor's labor hierarchy, below the longshoremen and the carters, the raw physical labor that the system requires but does not particularly honor. What he finds in it is something different from dignity, competence, and the quiet satisfaction of competence. He knows how to move things safely and efficiently. He knows the harbor's systems and rhythms. He knows which foremen to cultivate and which to avoid, which routes are efficient and which are not, how to read the loading schedules to maximize his income on any given day. He is, in other words, good at his job. He is moving a cargo of amphorae this morning, wine from the estates near Pompeii, bound for a ship that will take it north to Puteoli, and from there into the distribution network that supplies Rome's enormous thirst for Italian wine. The amphorae weigh approximately 40 kilograms each. He carries them with the specific technique of the experienced porter, the weight distributed, the back protected, the movements deliberate and efficient. He has been working since before sunrise. By midday he will have moved, depending on the morning's contracts, something between 50 and 100 amphorae. He does not look at the mountain this morning. He is facing the wrong direction most of the time, and the work requires all of his attention, and he is thinking about lunch, which Lucia will have ready by midday, and about a problem with his sandal strap that has been causing a blister for 3 days, and that he has not yet found the time to address. He carries amphorae. The harbor moves around him. The river moves. The sea is flat this morning, unusual for August, when the afternoon winds usually produce a chop on the bay, and the ships in the harbor sit still in their reflections. The mountain is behind Felix to the north, beyond the city that he walks through every day on his way to and from the harbor. He cannot see it from where he is working. He does not know about the cloud above the summit. He does not know about the tremors in the night. He slept through them, being a man whose relationship with sleep is the relationship of someone who works from before sunrise and who needs sleep with a physical urgency that does not leave room for tremors to wake him. He carries another amphora. He is thinking about the blister. Now let me go back to Livia's house on the Via della Fortuna, because the morning has progressed, and Livia is now dealing with something that requires more attention than the Tuesday morning was supposed to require. Her daughter Flavia, 11 years old, the one whose morning complaint about her brother was audible from the garden, has developed a fever. Not a high fever, not an alarming fever, the kind of fever that children develop in August in Campania, when the heat and the dust and the specific microbiological content of the water supply combine to produce the routine childhood illness that Livia has managed many times over 11 years of parenting, which means she knows the difference between the fever that requires a physician and the fever that requires a damp cloth and patience. This fever requires a damp cloth and patience, but it requires her attention, which means the wine shop and the inventory and the thinking about Marcus's education have moved to the background, and the foreground is Flavia's hot forehead and the specific concerned love that a mother brings to a sick child. Paula has brought the cloth. Paula is managing the household with the same competence she always manages it, the specific, invisible, total competence of the person who holds a household together. She has assessed Flavia. She has made the practical determination that this is a damp cloth situation and not a physician situation. She has procured the cloth and the basin of cool water and has set them up in Flavia's room with the efficiency of long practice. Livia sits beside Flavia's bed. She puts the cloth on Flavia's forehead. Flavia says, with the specific mournful quality of a sick child, that she was supposed to see her friend Terentia today. Livia says, "You can see Terentia when your fever is gone." Flavia says, "When will that be?" Livia says, "Tomorrow probably." This is the specific tender mathematics of childhood illness, the negotiation between the child's desire for normality and the body's requirement for rest, mediated by the parent who has been through this enough times to know how the arc runs. Flavia closes her eyes. Livia holds the cloth. Through the window of Flavia's room, which faces south, toward the sea, the morning light is doing the specific thing that August morning light in Campania does, which is being warm and golden and slightly hazy over the bay. The sea is visible from this window, a strip of blue at the bottom of the view, the familiar coastal line. Livia looks at the sea. She thinks about Felix's father, her husband Marcus, dead 4 years, who loved this view and who said to sit by this window on Sunday mornings and drink his wine looking at the sea with the specific contentment of a man who had worked hard for a comfortable life and who knew and appreciated that he had it. She thinks about him briefly. Then she goes back to Flavia. The fever is not alarming. The morning is not alarming. The mountain is behind the house, to the north, invisible from this south-facing window. The cloud above the summit is now the height of the mountain itself. Let me go to the kitchen. The kitchen of Livia's house is a compact, intensely functional space managed by a slave named Maya, who is 22 years old and who has been doing this work since she was 12, and who has, in 10 years of daily cooking in this kitchen, developed a relationship with it that is as intimate as any relationship she has. She knows the temperature of the oven by feel. She knows which pots conduct heat how and which are better for slow cooking versus quick. She knows where everything is stored and in what quantity, and what the current inventory implies about what can be cooked today without a trip to the market. She is making lunch. The lunch today is a bean stew with herbs from the garden, supplemented by the figs that Livia bought at the market yesterday, the ones whose price she argued with Gaius about, which are good figs, as his figs always are, and some salt fish from the storage jar. It is a reasonable Tuesday lunch, the kind of meal that this household eats most days, simple and nourishing and familiar. Maya cooks. She works in the kitchen with the focused efficiency of someone for whom cooking is a practice deep enough to require no planning, the hands knowing what to do while the mind is elsewhere. Her mind this morning is on a conversation she had last night with one of the household's other slaves, a man named Eros, which is his name, the name given to him by the household that owned him before, which he did not choose, and which he regards with a dry humor that is one of his more appealing qualities, about whether they might, eventually, be freed. Paula was freed. This is the evidence. Paula was a slave in this household and is now free and still in this household by choice and arrangement, and the evidence of Paula's manumission is the evidence that it is possible, that freedom is not only for other people in other situations. Maya thinks about this as she stirs the bean stew. She thinks about what freedom would mean, not in the grand sense, not in the philosophical sense of the Stoics whose discussions of liberty she has heard fragments of, but in the practical, sensory, immediate sense. What it would feel like to make decisions about her own time. What it would feel like to go to the market and buy things for a household that was her own household. What it would feel like to cook in a kitchen that was, in whatever limited sense the economics of a freedwoman's life allow, hers. She stirs the stew. The beans are nearly done. Through the kitchen window, a small opening in the wall that provides light and ventilation, she can see a section of the garden wall, and above it a sliver of the northern sky. The northern sky has something in it that the northern sky does not usually have. She looks at it for a moment. She goes back to the beans. The morning is almost over. Let me take you to the street. Not any specific street, the city's streets, the network of them, the paving stones that every person in this story has walked on, that are worn smooth in the specific places where people have walked the most, that have the stepping stones set at crossing points that allow pedestrians to cross without stepping in the running water, and the waste that fills the low center of the street, that have the ruts from centuries of cartwheels cut into the stone at the exact same width, because carts and wheels have been the same width for long enough that the ruts have become their own infrastructure. The streets are full this Tuesday morning. Pompeii's streets are always full. This is a city whose 20,000 inhabitants and constant tourist traffic produce a density of street life that is the texture of urban existence in the ancient world, the specific loud, busy, smelly, warm human fullness of a place where everyone goes out because staying in is the smaller life. There are people going to work, and people coming from work, and people going to the baths, and people coming from the baths, and people buying things at the shops that line every street at the ground level, and people delivering things and people carrying things and children running between the adults and dogs doing what dogs do in city streets, and the occasional litter bearing someone wealthy through the press of bodies, and the vendors with their mobile stalls, and the politicians with their campaign followers and the priests with their ritual objects and the beggars at the temple steps and the tourists, always they. Tourists consulting their equivalents of guidebooks and looking at the buildings with the expression of people who have been told these buildings are impressive and are attempting to feel impressed. On this Tuesday morning in August, this full and ordinary crowd, moving through the full and ordinary streets of a full and ordinary city, is approximately 2 hours from the most famous moment of geological violence in Western history. None of them know this. This is the thing about Pompeii that the distance of centuries makes difficult to fully feel. The difficulty is not conceptual. We know the story. We know what happens. We know that the mountain is going to do something that none of these people have a name for or a framework for. The difficulty is emotional. Knowing the ending makes it nearly impossible to see the morning as the morning saw itself, which is, as a morning, simply a morning, full of the specific concerns and pleasures and negotiations and small dramas of 20,000 people going about their Tuesday. The bread is in the oven. The stew is on the fire. The rhetoric lesson is in progress. The magistrate is hearing the property dispute. The maintenance worker is looking at the crack in the amphitheater seating. The fruit seller is arranging his figs. The teacher is making corrections on his student's work. The mother is holding a cloth to her daughter's forehead. The porter is moving amphorae. And 2,000 years later, we know what they did not know, which is that all of it is about to be stopped. But here is the thing that I want you to hold, the thing that the distance makes easy to lose. They were here. They were fully here, in the specific, irreducible way of people who are living their Tuesday rather than observing it. The bread Marcus Vesilius Vericundus pulled from the oven that morning was real bread, hot and good. The fig that Lucia bought from Gaius after their argument was a real fig, sweet because August is August, and the figs of Campania in August are exceptional. The conversation between Flavia and her mother about when she would see Terentia was a real conversation, the kind of conversation that has happened between sick children and their mothers in every language, in every century, in every civilization. The people of Pompeii were real people. The city was a real city. The morning was a real morning. And then the morning ended. At approximately 1 p.m. on August 24th, 79 AD, though some recent scholarship suggests the date may have been in October, based on the clothing found on some of the bodies. This is an ongoing debate among scholars, and I will note it here and proceed with the traditional dating. Vesuvius produced the eruption that had not happened in living memory. The first phase was the Plinian column, a Plinian eruption named, ironically, after Pliny the Elder, who observed this eruption from across the bay and died in the attempt to rescue people from the shore, and whose nephew Pliny the Younger wrote the 2 letters that are the primary eyewitness account of the disaster, produces a column of ash and gas and pulverized rock that rises tens of kilometers into the stratosphere, umbrella-shaped, called a Plinian column after the elder Pliny, because it was the eruption that produced the term. The column rose to approximately 30 kilometers. It was visible for 100 kilometers in every direction. From across the bay, from Misenum where the younger Pliny was with his mother, it looked like an umbrella pine, he wrote, an enormous tree of cloud and ash growing above the mountain, the trunk the column and the top spreading as it encountered the upper atmosphere and spread outward. From Pompeii, it was not like a tree. From Pompeii, standing in the streets at 1 in the afternoon, looking up at the mountain that was 2 kilometers away and growing this column from its summit, it was nothing like anything anyone had ever seen. Let me give you those first minutes. Marcus Vesilius Vericundus is in his bakery when the sound arrives. Not the visual, the sound comes first. A deep percussion that is below hearing in the way that very low sounds are below hearing, felt in the chest and the bones rather than perceived in the ears. A sound that the body registers before the mind has processed it as sound. Then the column. He is outside in the time it takes to go from inside to outside, and the column is there. His first thought, he will describe this later, to people he meets in the years after this day, in whatever life he builds in whatever city he settles in when Pompeii is gone. His first thought is that he has never seen anything so large. Everything he has seen in his life, the mountains, the sea, the buildings of Rome, which he visited once as a child, and which made him understand for the first time the scale that human beings can build to. Everything he has seen has been a particular size that his mind knows how to hold. The column above Vesuvius on the afternoon of August 24th is not a size that his mind knows how to hold. It exceeds the categories. It keeps growing while he watches it. It is 30 kilometers tall and growing taller, and it is 2 kilometers away, and the sound of it is continuous, a sound he can feel in the soles of his feet through the paving stones. He looks at it. His assistant Tyro is beside him. Tyro does not say anything. Neither does Marcus. They stand in the street with the other people in the street who have come out to look, and they look, all of them together, at the thing above the mountain. Then the pumice starts falling. The pumice, lightweight volcanic rock, ejected from the column and carried by the wind southward toward the city, begins falling on Pompeii approximately 15 minutes after the eruption begins. It starts lightly, like a strange hail, the small white and gray fragments falling on the paving stones and accumulating in the corners and the doorways. It is not immediately dangerous. It is strange, a substance that none of these people have a name for, falling from the sky in a rain that the sky has never produced before. Marcus looks at a piece of it that has fallen on his hand. It is light, lighter than stone should be. It is rough and irregular, clearly not natural precipitation, clearly produced by something. He looks up. The column is enormous and growing, and the sky around it is darkening. He makes a decision. He goes back into the bakery. He takes the money from the strong box. He takes the emergency food he keeps for emergencies that are not this specific emergency. He puts on his outdoor shoes. He goes out. He does not go north toward the mountain, which is where the road to Nola goes. He goes south toward the Porta Stabia, toward the road that leads away from the mountain. He is in the 18,000. Livia, in her house on the Via della Fortuna, is holding Flavia against her when the pumice begins to fall. She heard the sound. She went to the window and saw the column and spent approximately 20 seconds processing what she was seeing, which is approximately as long as it takes a person to go from seeing something without precedent to beginning to act on it. She called for Paula. Paula was already in the doorway. She said, "We need to leave." Paula said, "Yes." The speed of this exchange, the absence of the argument, the debate, the checking and rechecking that the cautious mind produces in a crisis, is evidence of something that the historical record about the eruption consistently suggests. The people who survived were, in many cases, the people who made the decision to leave quickly and without requiring complete certainty about what they were leaving from. Livia does not know what a Plinian eruption is. She does not have the vocabulary. She has the evidence. A mountain doing something no mountain has ever done, a sky that is darkening, a rain of strange gray fragments on the paving stones, and a sick child who needs to be carried. She carries Flavia. Paula takes the household's valuables. What can be carried? The portable wealth, the jewelry, and the portable cash, in a cloth bag that she has assembled with the specific efficiency of someone who has been mentally prepared for emergencies, without knowing what the emergency would be. They go south. Marcus, Livia's son, who has been in the street with his friends when the eruption began, finds them at the gate. He falls in beside them without needing to be told, 14 years old and frightened, and trying not to show it and mostly succeeding in the specific way of adolescent boys who have decided that managing fear is part of being a man. They go through the Porta Stabia. They go south, away from the mountain toward the sea. They are in the 18,000. Gaius, the magistrate, is in the basilica when the eruption begins. He is in the middle of the property dispute hearing, which has been running for 3 hours, and which has produced approximately the amount of progress that property dispute hearings in Roman courts typically produce in 3 hours, which is to say, the parties are slightly more clearly defined in their positions and slightly further from agreement. He hears the sound. He goes to the basilica's open courtyard. He looks north. He has been watching the thing above the mountain all morning, has been watching it since he saw it from the temple steps, and the thing has been growing all morning, and now it is this. The column rising above the mountain that is 2 kilometers from where he is standing, the sky darkening, the pumice beginning to fall. Gaius has read Strabo. He is a man of some education, a magistrate who came up through the Roman administrative system with its expectation of civic education, and the passages in Strabo about the geological nature of this region are, at this moment, becoming available to him in a form they were not available to him this morning, when they were text, and he had no reason to apply them to anything outside the text. He looks at the column. He thinks this is what Strabo meant. He does not think this with any particular satisfaction at having the textual knowledge confirmed. He thinks it with the specific flat clarity of a man who has just understood something large and is in the process of determining what to do about it. He determines to do what a magistrate in a crisis should do, which is help the city manage the crisis. He will try. He will spend the next several hours attempting to organize an evacuation, directing people toward the southern gates, managing the panic that will build as the pumice fall increases and the day darkens, and the nature of the situation becomes clearer to the people in the streets. He will do this with the competence and the calm that his years in office have built. He will also, eventually, have to make the decision that every person in Pompeii had to make on this afternoon, which is, stay or go. Gaius will go. He is in the 18,000. Let me tell you about the ones who stayed. Not all of them, and not in detail. The detail of the dying is not the point of this night, and the darkness that the dying produces is available in many forms and requires my assistance least. What I want to tell you about is the quality of the staying, the specific reasons that people had for not leaving, because the reasons are the most human part of the story. Some people stayed because they did not understand. This is the most important reason, and the hardest one to hold with full comprehension, because we are looking at this event from 2,000 years away, and we know what it was, and we know what was coming, and we cannot fully access the epistemic position of someone who had no framework for a volcanic eruption, and who was therefore, in the first hours of the event, genuinely uncertain about whether this was a temporary phenomenon or a permanent catastrophe. The pumice was falling, but it was falling lightly. The sky was darkening, but it had been dark before during storms. The sound was continuous, but sounds are continuous sometimes. The people who did not immediately recognize this as the crisis that it was, who waited to see if it would stop, who took shelter in their houses believing the shelter would be adequate, who helped others get organized rather than leaving themselves, were not irrational. They were making decisions with the information available to them, which was fundamentally different from the information available to us. A man named Stephanus stayed. He owned a fullery on the Via della Bendanza, one of the establishments where cloth was cleaned and processed using the urine and fulling clay technique that Roman laundries used, an industrial operation that occupied the ground floor of a large building and employed several workers. When the eruption began, Stephanus helped his workers get out, directed them toward the southern gates, made sure they understood the direction to go, and then went back into the building. He went back to get the cash from his strongbox. This decision, going back for the money, the portable wealth that represented years of work and the future of the business, was not irrational. People go back for valuables. This is a documented human behavior in disaster situations in every century, the specific action that the rational calculation of loss performs when it has not fully updated on the scale of the threat. Stephanus believed, probably, that he had time, that the eruption would slow or stop, that the building would provide protection. The building did not provide protection. He did not get out. His body was found near the strongbox. The strongbox contained money. A woman named Melania stayed because she could not carry her mother. Her mother was old, how old the record does not specify, but old enough that she could not walk with any speed, old enough that the specific mobility demands of a rapid evacuation through crowded streets in darkening conditions were beyond her. Melania stayed to help her mother. The two of them took shelter in a house near the Forum, in a cellar space they believed would be safe. The cellar space was not safe from the pyroclastic surges. Their bodies were found together. This is the most human reason for staying. The person next to you cannot go alone, and you cannot go without them. A soldier named Faventinus stayed because he was ordered to stay. He was part of the small military detachment that maintained a presence in Pompeii, not a large force. Pompeii was a peaceful provincial city that did not require significant military presence, but enough of a detachment to have a chain of command and a set of orders, and the orders, when the crisis began, were to maintain order and facilitate evacuation, and not to leave post. He maintained order. He facilitated evacuation. He did not leave post. He is in the 2000. And there were others who stayed for reasons that we cannot know, reasons that the ash preserved in the form of their positions and their gestures, but not in the form of their thoughts. The woman found with her hands over her face. The man found in a posture that suggests he was running and fell. The group of people found in a cellar with a lamp that had been burning when they died, evidence that they had light and therefore hope for some time before the end. We do not know their names. We know their shapes. The plaster casts of Pompeii's dead are one of the most affecting things in all of archaeology. The technique, developed by the excavator Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 19th century, of pouring plaster into the voids left in the hardened ash by the decomposition of the bodies, producing detailed three-dimensional captures of the final moments. The casts show faces with the eyes closed or the mouth open. They show hands raised against something. They show the specific postures of final moments, preserved with a fidelity that no contemporary account could match. They are people, reduced by the ash to the shape of their final seconds, but people, the curve of a shoulder, the bend of a knee, the way a face turns when a person turns their face away from something unbearable. There is a dog. The dog of Pompeii, the plaster cast of a dog that was chained to a post in a house near the Via dell'Abbondanza and could not leave because it was chained, is one of the images that people who visit the museum where it is displayed find the most difficult. Not because the dog is more tragic than the people. It is not, or not more, just differently. But because the dog's situation is so specifically clear, the chain so obviously the reason, the animal's inability to make the human's decision so visible in the shape of the cast. The dog was chained. The chain was not its choice. Let me pull back from the specific deaths and the specific reasons, and take you to the experience of the eruption from the outside, from across the bay, from the position of the two Plinies, uncle and nephew, whose letters constitute the primary eyewitness account and who were watching from Misenum, approximately 30 kilometers from Pompeii, across the water. Pliny the Elder, Gaius Plinius Secundus, was the commander of the Roman naval fleet at Misenum. He was 56 years old. He was also the greatest natural historian of the Roman world, the author of the Natural History, a work of 37 books that attempted to contain everything known about the natural world, which is the kind of ambitious project that only a person with both an enormous library and an enormous ego attempts. He was watching the column from across the bay when he made the decision that would kill him. He saw the eruption begin. He recognized it, with the specific recognition of a natural historian who has studied the geology of this region, as something unprecedented and significant. He began to make notes, because he always made notes, could not make notes. The note-making was as fundamental to his existence as breathing. And then he received a letter. The letter was from a woman named Rectina, whose villa was at the base of the mountain at the edge of the bay. The letter said, essentially, "We cannot escape by land. The eruption has cut off the road. Please send a ship." Pliny the Elder put his stylus down. He ordered the fleet to sea. He was going to rescue as many people as he could. This decision was simultaneously brave and possibly reckless and completely characteristic of the man. He was a natural historian. He wanted to see. He was a naval commander. He felt the responsibility for people at sea. He was a person of considerable courage, or possibly considerable overconfidence, or both simultaneously. He sailed toward the mountain. He got as far as the town of Stabii, to the south of Pompeii, where he took shelter with a friend named Pomponianus, who had already loaded his boats but could not leave because the wind was against them. Pliny the Elder, by all accounts, behaved with magnificent calm throughout the night, ate dinner, slept, snored loudly through the increasing rain of ash, woke and went to the shore in the morning to assess the possibility of leaving by boat. The gases killed him on the shore. He did not go dramatically. He sat down by his nephew's account. He asked for water. He was found dead, a relatively peaceful death by volcanic standards, the gases producing unconsciousness before the damage. He was in the 2000. His nephew, Pliny the Younger, stayed in Misenum throughout the event and survived it, which is why we have the letters. He was 17 years old on this date, and the letters he wrote later to the historian Tacitus, describing what he saw, are the first-person account that history has of this disaster. They are extraordinary documents, precise, controlled, showing evidence of the same natural historian tendency to observe that his uncle had, but filtered through the experience of a 17-year-old watching something vast and terrible from a distance, and being very frightened but also, inescapably, fascinated. He describes the column. He describes the darkness, the specific quality of the darkness as the ash cloud spread outward from the mountain, a darkness he describes as not the darkness of a night without moon or stars but a different darkness, a darkness like that of a sealed room with the lights out, a total absence of light that the night, with its stars, does not produce. He describes the panic, the people running, the crying, the calling of names. He describes his mother wanting to stay, believing they would die and that it was better to die than to run, and his own refusal to leave her and his eventual management of her toward safety. He was frightened. He was also writing. He was writing because writing is what you do when you are a natural historian in a family of natural historians, and the most extraordinary natural event in the history of the Roman world is happening around you, and you are 17, and you are frightened, and you are alive. We have the letters because he survived. We have the city because it was preserved. We have the bread because the oven was stone. In the excavations of Pompeii, archaeologists have found, among the many extraordinary things, a bakery, the bakery on the Via di Nola that may or may not be Marcus Vesilius Verecundus's, the records being imprecise, in which the oven still contained bread, carbonized, transformed by the heat, and the time into objects that are neither bread nor not bread, the specific shape and size of the loaves still visible, the baker's stamp on some of them still readable. The bread was in the oven. It is still there. 2,000 years later in a case in the Naples Museum, the bread of Pompeii, the bread that was baked on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, by a man who put it in the oven before the world changed, is still there. This is Pompeii's most ordinary miracle, the bread that was never eaten. Let me give you the city again, before we leave it. Not the eruption, not the death, not the ash and the darkness and the pyroclastic surges that are in every textbook. The city. The city in the morning. The paving stones of the Via della Bendanza, worn smooth in the center by the feet of the 20,000. The stepping stones at the crossings, set at a height that suggests the depth of the water that ran in the streets. The ruts in the stone from the cart wheels. The fountain at the corner of the Via di Mercurio, still flowing, the specific sound of running water that was the acoustic backdrop of every Roman city. The walls. The walls of Pompeii are extraordinary not for their paintings, though the paintings are extraordinary, but for their writing. The graffiti. The 11,000 pieces of writing that record the specific preoccupations and passions and humors and cruelties and loves of the people who lived here. The electoral notices, vote for MARCUS HOLCONIUS RUFUS, the bread sellers support HIM. The personal announcements, a copper pot has gone missing from this shop. Whoever returns it will receive 65 sesterces. The jokes, I am amazed, O wall, that you have not fallen down, loaded as you are with so many boring inscriptions. The love declarations, GAIUS LOVES LUCIA. The beautiful and entirely human, anyone who wants to may write here. Anyone who wants to may write here. This is written on a wall in Pompeii. It is still there. Written by someone who wanted to say something and chose a wall and said it, and the ash came and the wall was preserved, and the invitation remained, and 17 centuries later someone excavated it and read it, and it is still there. Anyone who wants to may write here. The invitation is still open. The people of Pompeii were people who ate bread and bought figs and argued about prices and worried about their children and carried amphorae and managed businesses and taught rhetoric and repaired buildings and fell in love and painted declarations of love on basilica walls and were amazed by boring inscriptions on walls and invited strangers to write on their walls. They were 20,000 people who were themselves, fully, specifically, irreducibly themselves, on the morning of August 24th. And then the morning ended. And the city stopped. And the stopping preserved everything in the specific, terrible completeness of a stopped clock. Everything exactly as it was, exactly as it had been every Tuesday, the bread in the oven and the stew on the fire, and the rhetoric lesson in progress and the property dispute in the basilica, and the porter moving amphorae at the harbor. All of it stopped. All of it preserved. All of it waiting for 300 years, for 1,000 years, for 1,700 years. To be found. Let me take you to the finding. The first modern excavation of Pompeii began in 1748, under the direction of Karl Weber, a Swiss military engineer working for the Kingdom of Naples. The city had been partially known since the 17th century, when accidental discoveries during construction works had produced finds that were recognized as ancient, but the systematic excavation, the methodical removal of the ash and the pumice, the mapping of the streets, the documentation of the finds, began in 1748 and has, in various forms, been continuing ever since. What the excavators found was not ruins. Ruins are what time produces when a city is abandoned, the gradual collapse of walls, the growth of vegetation through the floors, the slow reclamation of the built environment by the natural world. What the excavators found in Pompeii was not ruins. It was a city in the middle of a Tuesday, stopped. They found the bread. They found the food on the tables, the walnuts and figs and eggs and fish that were being prepared for the midday meal, preserved in carbonized form, still recognizable, still positioned on the surfaces they had been placed on. They found the wine. They found the graffiti. They found the dogs. They found the people. They found the paintings, frescoes on walls that had been sealed from air and light for 17 centuries, and that emerged from the ash with colors still vivid, the pigments preserved, the scenes mythological, erotic, decorative, narrative, as visible as the day they were painted. They found the surgery instruments. They found the mosaics. They found, in a bakery on the Via di Nola, the bread. And what they found in all of this finding was not primarily information about Roman architecture or Roman commerce or Roman social organization, though it was all of those things. What they found was evidence that the Romans were people. Not the marble people of the monuments, not the senatorial people of the histories, the people who bought figs and argued about the price, the people who wrote on walls because they wanted to leave a mark, the people whose dog was chained to a post and could not leave, the people whose bread was in the oven when the morning ended. People. This is what Pompeii gives us, and it is a gift whose value does not diminish with time. The specific, irreducible humanness of the people in the ash. Now let me slow down and bring you back. You are here now, in whatever room this is, in whatever version of the night you have made for yourself. And the morning of August 24th is 2,000 years away, and the city is still there, the actual city, the streets and the ovens and the fountain and the walls with their 11,000 pieces of writing. The city is still there. You can go. You can walk on the paving stones that Tiro walked on when he delivered bread, that Lucia walked on when she argued about figs, that Gaius walked on when he went to the basilica for the property dispute. You can stand at the fountain on the Via di Mercurio and hear running water. You can look at the wall where someone wrote anyone who wants to may write here. They have been waiting, the people of Pompeii, for someone to find them. They have been patient in the way that the dead are patient, which is absolutely, and the finding has been happening for 300 years and it continues. The excavation ongoing, new sections being opened, new finds emerging from the ash. They are still being found. In 2019, excavators found a thermopolium, a fast food counter, essentially, the equivalent of the stall where Tiro would have bought his morning soup, with the food still in the containers. The containers were decorated with vivid paintings of the food they held. The fresco of a duck, painted on the container that held duck, is as vivid as the day it was painted. They found bread again, in 2020, in a newly excavated section. More loaves, more carbonized circles, more evidence of the Tuesday morning that the mountain interrupted. They are still finding. Every new find is the same gift, the specific humanness of the people in the ash, the duck on the container, the bread in the oven, the writing on the walls. The invitation is still open. Anyone who wants to may write here. Let me tell you what I think the invitation means. Not what the person who wrote it meant, that is lost, like everything specific about the person who wrote it, their name and their age, and what they were thinking on the day they painted those letters on that wall. What I think the invitation means, as it has come to us, across 2,000 years of ash and excavation and scholarship, and tourists walking the paving stones in their modern shoes. I think it means, I was here, and I want you to know that I was here, and I want to leave space for you to say the same thing. This is what all the graffiti says in all its variety, the election notices and the love declarat. Ions and the lost copper pot and the jokes about boring inscriptions. I was here. I had opinions and desires and losses and humor. I was a person, and I want to leave a mark. The mark was left. The ash preserved it. We found it. And now we are here, in the middle of a night that is not August 24th, 79 AD, in a city that is not Pompeii, in a world that is not the world before the eruption, and the mark is still here, and the invitation is still open. I was here. The bread was in the oven. The morning was ordinary. The city was alive. And then it stopped. And the stopping preserved it. And the preservation gave it to us. And we have it now, the duck on the container, the bread in the oven, the writing on the walls, the shape of the people in the ash, the specific humanness of 20,000 people on a Tuesday morning in August. We have it. And it is one of the stranger and more valuable things that the past has given us, which is the specific, irreducible, indestructible fact that the people of Pompeii were people. As you are a person. As everyone who has ever lived in a city and bought food at a market and argued about the price, and went home and made lunch, and sat with a sick child and thought about money, and fell in love, and painted the name of the beloved on a wall, and was amazed by the boring things inscribed on other walls, and got up in the morning and started the bread, and went to work and looked at the mountain and thought, today looks like a regular day. As all of those people are people. As you are a person. Sleep in your warm room. The city is 2,000 years away, and it is still there. The bread is in the oven. The morning was real. Good night. And if this slow, careful walk through the past is something that helps you rest through the bread and the fountain and the graffiti and the terrible and beautiful specific humanness of a city in the hour before its last hour, please subscribe to Dull Tales. Hit like. Leave a comment. Tell me where you listened from and whether you've been to Pompeii and what it felt like to walk those streets. Every comment is a person. The invitation is still open. Next time, we go further back and further south, to Egypt, to the river, to the bread that is different bread in a different century, to a woman getting up before dawn in a world that has been going on for so long that the world we think of as ancient was, to her, simply Tuesday. But that is next time. For now, Pompeii, the morning, the bread. Sleep well. Let me give you more of Pompeii before we close. Not the eruption. We have been through the eruption, and the eruption is not the story. Let me give you more of the city, more of the people, more of the specific texture of the Tuesday morning that deserves to be fully inhabited before it ends. Let me take you to the house of the Vetii. The house of the Vetii is one of Pompeii's best-known addresses, a large and beautifully appointed house near the center of the city, owned by two brothers named Aulus Vettius Restitutus and Aulus Vettius Conviva, who were freed slaves who became wealthy traders and who poured their wealth into the house that was, in its time, one of the most elaborately decorated private residences in the city. On this Tuesday morning, one of the brothers, let us say it is Conviva, though the historical record does not specify who was where, is in the tablinum, the reception room that opens off the atrium, going through correspondence. He is 47 years old. He came to this city as a slave, was freed at 22, built his business with the specific focused energy of someone who has been told by the world that certain things are not available to them, and who has decided to make the world's information incorrect. The house is the evidence of how thoroughly he made it incorrect. The house's walls are painted with the paintings that we now know as among the most vivid survivals from the ancient world. The red panels with their mythological scenes, the painted figures that move through the rooms with the confidence of artwork made for display, the specific ambition of a man who wanted his house to say something about what he had become. They say it. They still say it now, in the excavated house that tourists walk through. On this Tuesday morning, Conviva is going through correspondence with the distracted efficiency of a man who is thinking about two things simultaneously. The letters in his hand, and a problem with a shipment of goods from Puteoli that has been delayed, and whose delay is beginning to have financial consequences that he needs to address. He is also aware of the mountain. He noticed the thing above the mountain this morning when he came out to the atrium. The atrium, with its open roof over the impluvium pool, gives a direct view of the sky, and the northern sky has something in it that the northern sky should not have. He noticed it. He is a practical man, built his life on paying attention to what is actually happening rather than what he expects to be happening. The thing above the mountain is not what he expects to be happening. He goes to the front door of the house. He looks north. The column is not yet there, it is still morning, and the eruption has not yet begun. But the disturbance above the summit is larger than it was yesterday. The smell of sulfur has been in the air for 3 days. The tremors last night were the strongest he has felt in years. He stands in his doorway, in the doorway of the house that his freedom and his work built. The house with its red walls and its painted myths, and its evidence of what a freed man can become. And he looks at the mountain. He makes a decision. He goes back into the tablinum. He calls for his steward. He tells the steward to begin preparing for the possibility of departure, to organize the portable valuables, to check the condition of the transport animals, to make sure the water vessels are filled. This is not panic. It is the specific practical caution of a man who has learned to prepare for possibilities without being certain of them, because certainty in business and in life is rare, and the people who wait for certainty before preparing often prepare too late. He goes back to the correspondence. He handles the 3 most urgent letters. Then he goes to find his brother. Together, the 2 brothers who built this house, who poured their freedom into it, who made it what it is, they begin to take down the small paintings that are most portable, the ones most worth carrying. They take the things that can be carried. They leave the red walls. The red walls are there now in the house that archaeologists excavated and opened to visitors, as vivid as the day they were painted, saying the thing that Conviva wanted them to say: I was here. I built this. I became this. The walls are still saying it. Now let me take you to the Temple of Isis. The Temple of Isis in Pompeii is one of the most completely preserved ancient temples anywhere in the Roman world, which is partly because the volcanic ash preserved it, and partly because the earthquake of 62 AD, which preceded the eruption by 17 years and caused significant damage throughout the city, required the temple to be substantially rebuilt, making the version that exists in 79 AD relatively recent, its walls still sharp and its decorations still vivid. Isis is an Egyptian goddess who has become, by the 1st century AD, one of the most popular deities in the Roman world. Her cult spread from Egypt along the trade routes, carried by the merchants and the sailors and the soldiers who encountered it in the eastern Mediterranean, and brought it back to Italy with the same enthusiasm that people have always brought back the gods they found abroad. The temple on this Tuesday morning is attended by a priest named Isidorus. He is 38 years old, and he has been a priest of Isis for 12 years, since he was initiated in a ceremony that he regards as the defining event of his life. The moment when the goddess became present to him in a way that was not theological abstraction, but something closer to experience, to the felt reality of a presence that is not the presence of a person, but his presence nonetheless. He is in the temple's inner sanctum, preparing for the morning ritual. The morning ritual of Isis worship includes the wakening of the goddess's image, the ceremonial opening of the inner shrine, the cleansing and dressing of the cult statue, the offering of incense and water and food that constitutes the goddess's daily breakfast. It is an ancient ritual, Egyptian in its origins, preserved in its essentials through the centuries and the translations into Roman form, and Isidorus performs it with the specific care of someone for whom the ritual is not formality but reality. He opens the shrine. He looks at the goddess. The goddess is a golden image, approximately 1 meter tall, depicted with the sistrum, the ritual rattle, in one hand and an ankh in the other, wearing the sun disk and the horns that her iconography requires. She has been in this temple for 30 years, since the temple was rebuilt after the earthquake. She has been worshipped in one form or another for 3,000 years before that. Isidorus performs the ritual. He chants the invocation in Greek, which is the formal language of the Isis cult in the Roman world, the language that carries the ritual's specific content, the sounds that the tradition has always used for this specific address. He offers the incense. He offers the water. He offers the bread. And then, because the ritual is complete and the day's first obligation is fulfilled, and he is a person who pays attention to the world around him, he steps outside the inner sanctum into the temple's open courtyard. He looks up. He looks north. The thing above the mountain is large. Issy. Doris is a man whose religion is organized around the idea that the world is alive with divine presence, that the gods speak through the events of the natural world, that the unusual is never merely the unusual but always also the sign of something that requires interpretation. He does not dismiss the thing above the mountain as weather. He reads it as what it is, which is the world doing something unprecedented, and the unprecedented in the Isis tradition is the goddess speaking. He stays in the courtyard for a long time. He is listening. What he hears, or what arrives in the specific quality of attention that the trained religious mind brings to the unusual, is not a voice and not a vision, and not anything that the rational mind would recognize as information. It is a quality of knowing, a felt urgency, the specific combination of clarity and necessity that the religious tradition calls revelation, and that the non-religious tradition calls intuition, and that both traditions recognize, when it arrives, as something to act on. He acts on it. He goes to the priest's quarters adjacent to the temple. He tells the other priests, "We should leave." They leave. He is in the 18,000. The temple of Isis remains preserved in the ash, its inner sanctum intact, the images still in place, the ritual objects still on the altar. The morning ritual was the last ritual. The goddess was offered bread on the morning of August 24th. The bread is gone. The altar is still there. Let me tell you about the children. Pompeii had children. This is a statement that requires no historical expertise and no archaeological evidence, because cities have always had children, but the specific evidence of children in Pompeii is worth noting because the city's preservation has given us things that most ancient sites do not. The children's toys, the children's shoes, the children's rooms, the scratched marks on walls at a child's height that suggest a child's hand. There are gaming boards scratched into the steps of public buildings, the ancient equivalent of the hopscotch grid drawn in chalk on a sidewalk, the evidence of children using public space for children's purposes with the confidence of children who belong to the space. There is a school where the students' practice writing is visible on the walls, the repetitive inscription of letters and numbers that constitute the educational exercise, the child's hand visible in the uncertain strokes. There are the toys found in the houses, small terracotta figures of animals and people, a small cart with wheels that can be pulled, a doll with articulated limbs. There is a child's footprint in a floor tile, pressed into the wet clay before it was fired, preserved in the fired tile, preserved in the ash, preserved in the museum where it can be seen now, the specific small foot of a Pompeian child. The child's name is not known. The foot is the size of a child, of approximately 4 years old. The foot is still there. On this Tuesday morning, the children of Pompeii are doing what children do on Tuesday mornings. The ones who go to school are at school. The ones who don't are at home. The ones old enough to work are working. The ones young enough to play are playing. Claudia, the 11-year-old rhetoric student at Demetrios' school, is writing her exercise and watching the mountain. She will be in the 18,000, or we cannot know for certain, but the probability suggests it, because her level of attention to the mountain and her intelligence suggest she will process the situation quickly when it becomes clear. The 4-year-old whose foot is in the tile is in a house somewhere in the city, probably with a parent or a caregiver, probably doing the ordinary things of a 4-year-old's Tuesday morning. We do not know if the 4-year-old made it out. We have the foot. Let me take you back to the bread. The bread of Pompeii, the actual carbonized loaves found in the bakery oven on the Via di Nola, is one of the most frequently reproduced images from Pompeian archaeology, which is itself telling. Of all the extraordinary things the city preserved, the image of bread in an oven speaks to something that reproduces itself endlessly, something that requires no context to be understood. Everyone knows bread. Everyone knows the oven. The bread was put in the oven by a baker who intended to take it out. The baker, Marcus Vesilius Vericundus perhaps, or another baker in another bakery on the same street, did not take it out. He left, and the bread remained, and the ash came, and the bread carbonized in the oven, and the oven stone preserved it, and 17 centuries later Giuseppe Fiorelli found it. He found bread. He found the bread that was baked on the morning of August 24th, 79 A.D., by a person who expected to take it out and sell it and go home for lunch and do the same thing the next day. The bread that was never eaten. In the National Archaeological Museum of Naples, there is a display case that contains, among other things, several carbonized Pompeian loaves. They are not beautiful, they are black and irregular, the cooking process having been violently interrupted at a specific moment, producing objects that are structurally bread but visually something else. But the shape is there, the round form. The baker's stamp on some of them, the small identifying mark that says, "This was made by a specific person in a specific place for a specific purpose." The purpose was never fulfilled. The bread is still there. This is the thing about Pompeii that I keep returning to, that I think is the most important thing about Pompeii for us, from this distance, in this night. The city preserved its ordinariness. Not its glory, its ordinariness. Not the temples in their prime or the paintings at their most vivid or the gardens in their summer growth. The city in the middle of a Tuesday. The bread in the oven, the stew on the fire, the graffiti on the walls, the arguing about figs, the dog on the chain, the fever in the child, the love declaration on the basilica wall. The ordinary life, stopped at a specific moment and preserved in the specific way that only catastrophe preserves, completely, suddenly, without the gradual decay that allows ordinariness to disappear before anyone notices it was there. We usually lose the ordinary. The ordinary is not what gets recorded. The ordinary is what happens between the events that get recorded, the texture of the days between the dates in the history books. It is usually lost because it is too ordinary to save, because nobody thinks to save what everyone does every day, because the archive values the exceptional and the ordinary flows past unrecorded. Pompeii's catastrophe was its archive. The ash preserved what would otherwise have been lost: the bread, the graffiti, the gaming board on the steps, the child's footprint in the tile. The most ordinary things preserved by the most extraordinary event. This is Pompeii's gift. Not the horror. Every catastrophe produces horror, and horror is not a gift. The gift is the specific, irreducible ordinariness. The evidence that 20,000 people were here, doing the ordinary things that 20,000 people do on a Tuesday morning in August, and that their ordinary things were preserved. I was here. The bread was in the oven. The morning was real. The invitation on the wall is still open. Anyone who wants to may write here. Let me now give you the city in its final hour. Not the eruption, not the dying, but the specific quality of the last hour of the morning before the eruption, the hour when the thing above the mountain was large enough to be unmissable, but the eruption had not yet begun, the hour when the city was still fully itself, but the air was changing. It is approximately noon. The midday heat is at its height, August in Campania, the sun directly overhead, the shadow at its minimum. The city has its midday rhythm, the slight slowing of activity that the heat produces, the workers taking their breaks in whatever shade is available, the baths full with the midday bathers, the shops still open but the street traffic slightly reduced. Above the mountain, the cloud is enormous. It is not a cloud. Everybody in the city knows by now that it is not a cloud, but the knowledge of what it is not coexists with the absence of knowledge of what it is, and in the absence of a name for the thing, the mind continues using the available word cloud, something, the thing above the mountain, while the body begins, below the level of conscious processing, to register the specific quality of information that the thing is providing, which is. This is not ordinary. The smell is stronger. The sulfur, which has been present for days as a background note, is today a foreground note. The ground has been trembling intermittently since morning, not the large tremors of the night before, smaller ones, more frequent, a continuous subtle vibration that the residents of seismically active regions learn to read. The light has a quality. This is something that the accounts of the eruption consistently mention, though the accounts are necessarily retrospective. The quality of the light in the hours before the eruption, a specific yellowish cast, the sun filtering through the increasing ash content in the upper atmosphere, producing a light that was not the ordinary August light of Campania. Lucia is in her house. She is doing the ordinary midday work, the preparation for lunch, the management of her mother, who has opinions about everything, the thought of Felix who will be home shortly. She has been watching the mountain through her window all morning, and the mountain has been increasingly difficult to ignore, and she has made the calculation that the women of the household who have practical responsibility for others make in these situations. Wick. H is, at what point does the thing require us to leave? She has not yet reached that point. But she is close. Felix will be home at midday. She will ask him what he saw at the harbor. If the ships have left, if the captains who know the sea and the sky and the signs of bad weather have begun moving their vessels, that will be the information she needs. She stirs the beans. The mother is in her chair, looking out the window. The mother says, "That mountain is doing something strange." Lucia says, "I know." The mother says, "In my village when I was young, the priests used to say that when the mountain smells you should pray." Lucia says, "The mountain here is not the same mountain." The mother says nothing for a moment. Then she says, "A mountain is a mountain." Lucia stirs the beans. The midday heat is at its height. The light has its particular quality. The mountain is doing something strange. 40 minutes from now, Felix will be home. 45 minutes from now, Lucia will see his face and know, without his saying anything specific, that the harbor captains have begun moving their ships. 50 minutes from now, Lucia and Felix and her mother will leave the house. 55 minutes from now, they will be in the street, heading toward the southern gate. 1 hour from now, the column will be visible from the street, and Lucia will stop in the crowd of people all looking north, and she will look at it for a moment, and she will take her mother's arm and she will go. She is in the 18,000. The beans are on the fire. The morning technically is over. But it was a good morning. An ordinary, specific, full morning in a city that was alive and full of people who were arguing about figs and teaching rhetoric and repairing amphitheaters, and making bread and worshiping gods and loving people, and writing on walls, and doing all the things that 20,000 people do on a Tuesday in August. The morning was good. The city was real. The people were people. And now, from this distance, on this night, in this room, we have been with them. We have been with Marcus and Tyro and Livia and Gaius and Lucia and Decimus and Titus and Aurelius and Claudia and Maia and Isidorus, and the Vetii brothers and Felix, and the 4-year-old whose foot is in the tile, and the person who invited strangers to write on their wall. We have been with them on their last Tuesday. And the last Tuesday was just a Tuesday. Which is the saddest thing and the most beautiful thing about Pompeii, which is the thing that the bread in the oven says every time it is seen, which is, the most ordinary day can be the last day, and the last day was just the day, and the day was full, and the people in it were fully themselves. The bread was in the oven. Sleep. The city is still there. The morning was real. Thank you for spending tonight in Pompeii with us here at Dull Tales. If this kind of slow, careful, immersive history is what you're looking for at the end of the day, please subscribe. It means everything for a small channel. Hit like, leave a comment. Tell me if you've been to Pompeii. Tell me what it felt like to walk those streets and know what you know. Tell me if you have read the invitation. Anyone who wants to may write here. Good night. The bread is in the oven. The morning was real. Let me take you deeper into the city before the morning ends. Let me take you to the places that the tourists do not always find, the corners and the back streets, and the working spaces that make up the majority of the city's actual square footage, but receive a fraction of its scholarly and popular attention. Because the temples are impressive, and the paintings are beautiful and they draw the eye. But the city is mostly not temples and paintings. The city is mostly the street-level shops and the cramped workshops, and the rented rooms above the ground floor, and the neighborhood shrines, and the water fountains and the laundries, and the 20,000 people who live in and through these spaces. Let me take you to the Pompeian laundry. A fullery, fullonica, is one of the most essential and least glamorous businesses in a Roman city. The process of cleaning and finishing wool cloth requires, at various stages, the use of human urine as a mordant and cleaning agent, which is collected from the street by way of large pots left at the side of the road for the purpose, collected and used in the washing process, and which gives the fullery its specific and comprehensive smell. The fullery on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the one belonging to Stephanus, who will go back for his strongbox, is busy on this Tuesday morning. A woman named Vittoria is working in it. She is 26 years old and she has been working in this fullery since she was 17, which means she has been dealing with the smell since she was 17, which means she has long since stopped registering it, in the specific way that people who work in intensely smelled environments stop registering the smell by a process that is part olfactory adaptation, and part the specific mercy of the brain toward the things it cannot change. She is treading cloth. This is the core task of the fullery. Standing in a shallow stone basin containing the cleaning solution, water, urine, fuller's earth, and treading the cloth underfoot, the continuous motion that forces the cleaning agents through the fibers, that removes the lanolin and the dirt and the finishing of the new cloth and produces, after washing and rinsing and stretching, the finished cloth that Rome wore. She has been treading since the second hour of the day. Her legs ache. This is not news. Her legs always ache by mid-morning, and she has developed the specific ergonomic adjustment of someone whose work is physically demanding in one very specific way, the permanent slight modification of posture that distributes the load of the treading across the whole body, rather than concentrating it in the calves and ankles. She works. She thinks about her family, a husband who works at the harbor, children who are at the neighbor's care while she works, the specific arithmetic of a working family's day, the logistics of who is where and when, and the coordination required. She does not look at the mountain. The mountain is not visible from where she stands in the basin, the walls of the fullery blocking the northern view, and she has not been outside this morning except to go from her house to the workshop, which is 2 streets, and she was looking at the ground when she walked because the streets are uneven, and she has turned an ankle before. She does not know about the thing above the mountain. She will know when Stephanus comes in at midday and tells everyone to leave. She will know it immediately, in the specific way of people who have been paying attention to everything around them except the one thing that matters, and who then receive the information with the quality of someone for whom the missing piece has suddenly arrived. The smell, the tremors, the quality of the air this morning, and now this. She will leave her basin. She will leave her work. She will go to get her children. She is in the 18,000. But that is midday. Right now, this Tuesday morning, she is treading cloth. The foolery is doing what the foolery does. The smell is what it is. Let me take you to the theater. Pompeii has two theaters, a large open-air theater capable of holding approximately 5,000 spectators, and a smaller roofed Odeon, or concert hall, capable of holding perhaps 1,500. The theaters are in the southern part of the city, near the Triangular Forum, and they represent one of the most culturally significant aspects of Pompeian life. Pompeii went to the theater. This is documented in the electoral notices on the walls, the theater companies, and the theater-going associations that threw their political support behind specific candidates, the evidence of an audience culture with opinions and affiliations. The actors were known. The performances were anticipated. The seats were contested in the specific way that good seats at desirable events are always contested. On this Tuesday morning, there are no performances scheduled. But a man named Atticus is in the large theater anyway. He is 40 years old and he is an actor, not one of the famous ones, not the star whose face would be recognized on the street, but a competent working actor who has been employed by the theaters of the region for 15 years, and who knows his craft with the specific precision of someone who has performed the same roles in the same plays in enough different cities to understand where the performance works and where it doesn't. He is in the theater this morning because he is rehearsing. Not with the company, alone, in the empty theater, going through a speech that he will perform in 3 days. He does this, rehearses alone in empty theaters, because the empty theater tells him things about the space that the rehearsals with the company, which are necessarily about the ensemble rather than the individual, do not tell him. He learns the acoustics. He learns where to stand to be heard in the back row without shouting. He learns the specific quality of the theater as a space, its personality, which every theater has, the particular way it receives and returns the human voice. He is in the middle of the speech, a speech from a comedy, the kind of speech that requires the specific timing of comedy, the calibration of the pause and the breath, when the sound arrives. Not the eruption, it is still an hour before the eruption. The sound that arrives is a deep vibration, the ground movement, the latest in the series of tremors that have been running through the city for a week. Atticus stops. He has been in enough cities, near enough mountains, to have a relationship with this kind of vibration. And the relationship is one of professional awareness, the awareness of a man who knows that the theaters he works in are stone structures that require structural integrity, and that structural integrity and ground movement are in tension with each other. He looks at the theater around him. He checks the walls with his eyes. He checks the ceiling. He checks the sky through the open top. The sky above the open top of the theater is wrong. He stands in the center of the theater's orchestra, the circular performance space at the base of the seating, and looks at the sky, which is northward from this theater, and the northward sky has the thing in it that the northward sky has had all morning, the disturbance above the summit of the mountain. He has been in theaters in Naples. He has seen Vesuvius from Naples. He has never seen it do this. He collects his things. He walks to the theater's exit. He is in the 18,000. The theater is empty. The seats wait for the audience that will not come. In 3 days, there was supposed to be a performance. The performance was never given. Now let me take you one more time to the harbor, because the harbor is where the decision gets made, the decision about whether to stay or go, in a form that is different from the individual decisions being made in houses and workshops and theaters around the city. A ship captain named Marcellus is at the harbor. He is 48 years old, a career sailor who has been working the coastal routes of the Tyrrhenian Sea for 25 years, and he knows the sea and the sky and the wind with the specific, embodied knowledge of someone who has been reading these things professionally for a quarter century, whose livelihood and whose life have depended on reading them correctly. He has been watching the mountain since yesterday. Not with concern, exactly, with the professional attention of a man who reads the sky as a text, and who has noticed that the sky's text is changing in ways that he does not have a specific entry for in his mental catalog of weather patterns. The smell, the ground movement, the specific quality of the morning air, and now the thing above the mountain, which has been growing since he first saw it at dawn and which, by mid-morning, is large enough that he cannot look north without seeing it. He does not know what it is. What he knows is that things are moving north to south. The wind, which should be the summer sea breeze, has shifted, or rather the wind is now from the mountain rather than from the sea, which means whatever the mountain is producing is being pushed southward toward the bay. He goes to his vessel. He begins preparing for departure. He does this without announcement, without instruction, without any public declaration of what he is doing or why. He is a ship captain preparing his vessel to leave the harbor, which is a thing ship captains do, and the specific reason that is driving this particular preparation is his own business. But other captains see him, and other captains see each other seeing him, and the harbor begins to wake up to itself, the specific collective intelligence of a working port registering the movement and the preparation and the sky and the smell and the ground, and making the assessment that the individual minds were making separately, now made collectively, the aggregate of many individual readings of many individual signs producing a harbor-wide conclusion that lands at approximately the same time in the awareness of the people who work there. We should go. Felix, the porter, does not make this decision consciously. He makes it bodily, the specific way that the body ahead of the mind registers that the environment has changed, and that the appropriate response to the changed environment is movement, is the direction away from the thing that is producing the change. He puts down the amphorae he is carrying. He is done for the day. He goes to find Lucia. The harbor moves. The ships begin to leave. The bay, which has been flat all morning, unusually flat for August, the surface a mirror, begins to show the chop of the wind change, the specific disruption of the surface that the mountain's influence is producing. The sea knows. The sea always knows before the land does, which is why the sailors knew, which is why the harbor moved, which is why Felix put down the amphora. He goes through the city. He finds Lucia. She sees his face. She knows. They go. The mother takes her daughter's arm. They go south. Now let me tell you one more thing about the city before we leave it. In the years after the eruption, not the centuries, the years, there were people who came back. The city was buried under approximately 4 to 6 meters of pumice and ash, but the tops of the tallest buildings were sometimes still visible, or at least the general location of the buried city was known, and in the years after 79 AD, survivors and loot. Arrests dug down into the ash looking for valuables. They found some. They also left marks. In the excavations, archaeologists have found tunnels dug through the ash by ancient looters, the specific passages of people who came back within years of the eruption, while the ash was still relatively loose, and dug for the things that had been left behind. Sometimes these tunnels pass through the walls of houses, the diggers having cut through the painted plaster to access the next room, leaving a hole in the fresco where the person went through. These holes are recorded in the archaeological documentation. They are evidence of the people who came back to the city that was gone and dug through the ash of it, looking for what could still be found. Some of the surviving Pompeians came back. Think about this. You are a person who lived in this city, on the Via dell'Abbondanza perhaps, near the fountain and the fruit seller's stall. You left on August 24th with your family and your portable valuables, and you walked south, and then you watched the mountain do what it did, and you heard the sounds, and you saw the darkness, and you survived. And then, weeks or months or years later, you came back. You came back to the place where the city was, and you stood on 4 meters of ash that covered the streets you walked every day, and you dug. What were you looking for? The official answer is valuables, money, jewelry, portable wealth that had been left in the evacuation. But I think some of them were looking for something else. I think some of them were looking for the city. Not the physical city. They could see that the physical city was gone, buried under the ash that they were standing on. The city they were looking for was the city as they had known it, the city that was a morning on the Via dell'Abbondanza with the fountain running and the fruit seller in his stall, and the arguments about figs and the bread just out of the oven. That city was gone. The ash was where it used to be. They dug anyway. This is the most human thing about Pompeii. Not the survival, not the catastrophe, but the return. The people who came back and dug, who could not accept entirely that the city was completely gone, who needed to put their hands in the ash and feel for something that was not there anymore. The holes in the frescoes are their mark. I was here and I came back, and I could not find what I was looking for. Let me add one more character to the morning. A man named Publius is in the city on the morning of August 24th, and he is not a resident. He is a visitor, a wealthy Roman from the capital who is spending August in the Bay region, as wealthy Romans do, and who has come to Pompeii specifically to see the restoration work at the Temple of Apollo, which has been underway for the past 3 years following earthquake damage and which is, by the accounts of the people he has been talking to, something worth seeing. He is 42 years old. He is a man of education and comfortable means, a member of the equestrian order, the second tier of Roman aristocracy. He travels with 2 slaves who manage his practical needs, and he has been in the city for 2 days and has seen the forum and the baths and the amphitheater, and has eaten several meals in the establishments that the guidebooks to the region recommend for visitors of his class. He is in the forum this morning. He is looking at the Temple of Apollo. The temple is indeed something worth seeing. The restoration work has been done with care and skill, the columns re-erected, the painted decoration reapplied, the statue of Apollo in the forecourt looking as if it has always been there rather than having been replaced after the earthquake. He looks at the temple. He looks at the forum around him, the specific quality of a tourist looking at something he has read about, the experience of the real thing after the text, the recalibration of the description against the reality. Then he looks north. He has been looking north periodically all morning. He came from Rome 2 weeks ago, and in Rome, the news of the tremors in the Campanian region had reached him before he left, the letter from his friend in Puteoli describing the recent seismic activity. He has been in enough cities near enough active geology to have some framework for what seismic activity might mean. The thing above the mountain this morning does not fit the framework. He stands in the forum of Pompeii and looks at the thing above the mountain, and he runs through what he knows, which is more than most people in the forum around him know, the educated Roman's access to the natural historical tradition, meaning he has a vocabulary for volcanoes even if he has never seen one. And what he knows produces, in fairly short order, the conclusion that the vocabulary requires. He is standing 2 kilometers from a volcanic mountain that is doing something volcanic. He goes to the table where his transport animals are kept. He pays the stable fee. He leaves the city. He does not know, leaving the city through the southern gate in the midday heat with the column beginning to form above the mountain, whether the city behind him is going to be destroyed. He does not know if he is being cautious or overcautious, whether the eruption will be minor and contained or whether the city will survive. He knows he is leaving. He is in the 18,000. His account, hypothetical, composite, representative of the class of educated observer who was in the city on this day, would have been, in another universe, one of the primary sources for the event. The educated man who was there and left and could describe what he saw with the precision that education provides. We have Pliny the Younger's account instead. We have enough. The accounts tell us, there was a morning, there was a city in its morning. There were 20,000 people doing the things that 20,000 people do on a Tuesday in August. There was a mountain that was doing something that nobody had a name for, and there was a morning that ended. And in the ending, the morning was preserved. The bread is in the oven. The invitation is still open. The child's foot is still in the tile. The morning was real. You have been with it tonight. Sleep.